Hello and welcome to the Game Lore Archives. Previously we spoke about the Ayleids and their impact on Tamrielic history. One aspect of their culture we only briefly touched on was their slavery of the humans and how vindictive and cruel they were. Under the Ayleids, the human slaves found themselves subject to Daedric arts such as flesh sculpturing and gut gardening,
which unfortunately are exactly as they sound.
The Ayleids preyed without mercy upon the young race of men, slaughtering and enslaving them at whim. Their cruelty was brought to an end by the little slave girl, who then went on to establish the first human empire in Tamriel. This empire rose up to save humanity, and possibly due to some dramatic irony in a lack of humanity, brought it tumbling down again. But let's start from the beginning.
Before she became the Empress we recognise today, she was just a slave girl. A lot of her history from the early part of her life was lost, from who her owner was to what her role was as a slave, or even to which Ayleid tribe owned her. The only thing that we do know is that she was born in Ayleid,
the ruins of which are just south of the Imperial city.
The Nords had pushed the elves out of Skyrim to create the first human kingdom. Alessia was inspired by this and dreamt of being able to push the elves out of Cyrodiil and free the humans from the Ayleid rule. She also started to worship the same gods as them, as their gods were much more sympathetic to humans than the elven gods were. After hearing her prayers, Kynareth sent her demigod son Morahouse, who had the appearance of a winged minotaur and became Alessia's lover.
Please, no Rule 34 for this.
Kynareth also sent Alessia visions that would help her overthrow the Ayleids. With one of these visions also came Perennial Whitestrake, who would have just as an important role, if not more so, than Alessia in the human uprising.
In the 242nd year of the First Era, Alessia's army were finally ready to begin the rebellion in earnest. The Ayleids were a fractured society with several tribes throughout Tamriel, which gave the humans their opportunity to overthrow them.
They were actually embroiled in their own civil war at the time.
There were also Ayleids that were sympathetic towards the humans and actually helped them when they rose up. Perennial was ferocious in his destruction of the Ayleids, and on occasion Alessia had to step in with the help of the Aedra to quell him from the often quite barbaric acts that he would commit. In wake of this, the Ayleids were pushed further and further towards the White Gold Tower. During these events, command of the elven armies was passed to Ummaril, the Unfeathered. He was a half-god, half-elf, and this was why he was the only one that could fight against Perennial,
who was also a demigod.
Ummaril's strength was further enhanced by a deal he made with Meridia. The power that was bestowed upon him made him immortal. His spirit was bound to Meridia's womb, so that when his body was killed, his spirit would be saved. She also bolstered his forces with her Aurorans,
which were her Daedric soldiers.
During the battle for the White Gold Tower, Perennial managed to defeat Ummaril, and sure enough his spirit was taken to oblivion. It was such a close battle that the Ayleid forces took advantage of the weakened Perennial and killed him. They tore him into 8 pieces and left his head for Alessia and Morahouse to find. When Morahouse arrived at the blood-covered throne room, Perennial's spirit lingered and told the half-bull that Ummaril was not defeated and would indeed return to exact his ferocious retribution. At this stage, it was too little too late for the Ayleids, and the humans soon took control of the tower. They pushed out the elves, and Alessia was made the first Empress of the Empire of Cyrodiil.
The key to her success was a combination of factors, from help from Skyrim to divine inspiration from the gods. One source of help Alessia was keen to reward were the rebel Ayleids, who thought the slavery and mistreatment of human was evil, and they rose up with Alessia. She gave them land and allowed them to continue to be lords in their lands. Hand in hand of this decision was the choice of which gods to worship. She didn't want to anger the Nords who had helped her, and likewise didn't want to anger the Ayleids who had made such sacrifices for her. She walked a very thin line, and the stability of her empire relied on her making the right decision as to who to worship. In the end, she prudently decided to merge the gods into her own pantheon.
And I think she dodged a bullet there.
She took the less controversial elven gods and took some of the Nordic gods to create the 8 divines that we know today. One topic she pragmatically avoided was that of Lorcan. To the Nords who knew him as Shor, He was a hero to the humans who defended the wandering Elnathay, and they venerated him. To the elves, he was the trickster god who caused the Aedra to fall from grace and stopped the elves from continuing their divine existence. As these beliefs are polar to each other, Alessia decided to let the people believe what they wanted in order to bring stability to her young empire. This was how she ended up with the 8 divines, which now is the most predominant religion in all of Tamriel.
As Alessia lay on her deathbed, Lorcan visited her with a message from Akatosh. The first thing Akatosh did was to infuse her with his Dragonblood, which created the very first Dragonborn. She was then bound to the Amulet of Kings,
which seems to be badly misnamed, considering the first person to own it was a slave queen.
But it was a symbol of Akatosh's promise to keep the Oblivion Realm shut from Nirn, so long as the ruler from her bloodline, with dragon blood in their veins, sits on the throne. This stayed the case through thick and thin until the Third Era, when the Mythic Dawn, a cult who worshipped Mehrunes Dagon, nearly put the Dragonfires out for good.
Although the hero of Kvatch managed to put a stop to all that.
When Alessia eventually died, Penelol took her soul to Akatosh, and she became known as Saint Alessia.
After Saint Alessia's death, her son took the throne. Now, we briefly mentioned Morehouse, Alessia's lover. He was the father of her son. He ruled as the second emperor of the Alessian Empire. Bubbling underneath his reign, and even going back into Alessia's reign, was a completely understandable hatred towards the elves. This in turn spawned the Alessian Order. It actually started in the jungles of Colovia by an Imgur called Murok. He is said to have spoken to Alessia on many issues about the new religion.
And this is a ghost of Alessia, not actually Alessia.
And the validity of the elven lords that Alessia had left in place. He wrote her replies in blood, and these became the 77 inflexible doctrines.
Just a few.
Yeah, just a few. There were 4 major sects of the Alessian Order, the earliest of which were the Holy Brothers of Murok. They were an early sect that created almost at the same time as the Alessian Order, and they were famed for their cleansing of the Fane. This was the destruction of an Ayleid temple from which Daedric beings came forth. They destroyed the temple and everything housed in it, so the demons could no longer come to Tamriel, saving the surrounding area from their tyranny.
There was the Temple of One, who were really the only sect of the Alessian Order to have survived its downfall. Also, to be accurate, it didn't survive, but it was restored later on. Even then, it was restored more to safeguard the Dragonfires and not really associated with the Alessian Order anymore. One of the most famous followers of the temple was none other than Tiber Septon himself.
There was also the Temple Zero Society, and to me it does sound like some kind of Illuminati cult. They were mainly concerned with myths and legends of Tamriel rather than the worship of gods, but because they acknowledged Murok and his teachings, are therefore linked quite closely with the Alessian Order.
The final sect that was prominent was the Murakati Selective, whose goal was to change the reality of all of Urbis and meld it to their desires. We're not sure if it worked, but we will go into it more shortly.
Anti-elven feelings were stoked further because the Direni were taking land in Skyrim from the Nords. The current emperor, Army El, sent Imperial forces to fight with Skyrim against the elves. In year 361 of the First Era, the Alessian Order staged a coup and took control of the Empire, in which the 77 doctrines became their law, and they also changed to the Alessian doctrines. They were so harsh on the remaining Ayleids that they actually fled from Cyrodiil. Soon, King Borgus of Skyrim attempted to forge an alliance with the Alessian Empire, but while he was travelling through Cyrodiil, he was killed by the Wild Hunt. After the War of Succession, which left Skyrim weak, it was then forced to join the Empire.
At the beginning of Emperor Gorius's reign, the Colovian estates were still their own kingdoms and independent of the Alessian Empire. Skingrad and Kvatch were united through marriage and became quite a powerful duo for the Empire to have on the doorstep. Inaction from the Empire was a good call though. A plague swept through the Colovian lands and killed the majority of the royal families of Skingrad. Next in line to rule was actually a priest in the Imperial city, and as soon as he was able to, he made Skingrad part of the Empire, as he felt to resist the Empire was to resist the gods themselves. Rislav Larich, who was from Skingrad was so furious with this that he led a small army back to Skingrad and murdered his brother. The Empire heard of this treachery, and once they had quelled the rebellion that had spouted up in Skyrim with Emperor Gallius, took the force he used to invade Skyrim as a country to bear on Skingrad, with the intention of intimidating Rislav into rejoining the Empire, but this plan didn't work out. Rislav retreated into the highlands, and Gorius's army chased him. Rislav retreated to the highlands, and as Gorius's army chased him, it was whittled down by ambushes and small skirmishes.
Rislav was much more clever and tactically sound. Though the Alessians relied on their brute strength in numbers, it didn't work for them.
Suffering heavy casualties and becoming completely demoralised, they actually ended up retreating. This was to become the inspiration to a much larger problem for the Empire.
Seeing Rislav's success, the rest of the Colovian kingdoms joined Skingrad and Kvatch in their opposition of the Alessian Empire. Clan Direni started to outlaw Alessian reforms in their territories, and invigorated by their success, planned for all-out war against the Empire. The Direni made a tentative alliance with the Nords over their mutual hatred for the Empire. The Direni forces were in turn pushed deep into Glenumbra, but they made a counter-offensive which effectively ended in a draw. The Alessian army was pushed back due to a huge number of casualties, and although the Direni technically won, their numbers were so heavily reduced that the Bretons then rose up and took control of High Rock from the Direni. The damage to the Alessian armies meant they could no longer influence the countries around the Empire, and it could never recover from this. Skyrim took this opportunity to outlaw Alessian reforms, destroy the Alessian temples, and burn all the priests that resided in them. They then instigated a more traditional Nordic religion and pushed out Alessian influence from Skyrim.
During Empress Hestra's reign, the Alessian Empire managed to stabilise somewhat and actually go somewhere into helping the humans in Tamriel. This was something that had seemed to have fallen by the wayside for quite some time now since Saint Alessian had passed away. Hestra led campaign against a violent vampire lord, and she chased his armies Bankorai. Here, the local armies stopped their retreat, and alongside the Imperial forces, the Grey Host was destroyed. After this, the Bretons of High Rock, who had overthrown their elven master, joined the Alessian Empire peacefully. She then went on to suppress the Reach and defeat the leader, known as Red Eagle. He was able to fend off the Alessian armies for such a long period, but eventually they took the Reach. The Reachman elders wanted to submit to the request to save their people, but Red Eagle's pride meant he resisted, and as a consequence he was cast out from their people. He still had great influence, and managed to build an army to push the Empire out of his reach. His power came from a deal he made with a Hackraven, who made him a Briarheart and provided him the ability to make him a hero in the Reach. Eventually, Hestra rallied a massive army, and through sheer military might, she marched to the Sundered Hills and destroyed the Red Eagle and his armies. She also managed to start a fight against piracy, especially in the Black Marsh area, and she caught many legendary pirates and also provided the first reliable details on the Black Marsh and its impenetrable marshes. She also greatly improved roads throughout Cyrodiil and made travelling much, much easier for people.
Unfortunately, while Empress Hestra was making strong steps towards restoring the power of the Alessian Empire, there were other more sinister plots unfolding.
Because as we all know, there's never a dull moment in Tamrielic history.
Fervidus Tharn was but an oblate in the Alessian Order, but quickly rose through the ranks to the highest rank possible, which, at the time, was as powerful as the Empress. As he came to power, a stubborn and vindictive sect of the Alessian Order developed called the Mercti Selective, who we mentioned earlier. We're not sure if he was part of the collective. There are sources on each side. Tharn tried to stop the Selective, but people say these actions were merely to cover the fact that he was part of the Selective.
Sounds like a conspiracy to me.
So Abner Tharn himself says that he was an enemy of the Selective, but there are notes written by Fervidus Tharn that instructs the Selective how to perform the ritual of the Staff of Towers and activate the hurling disc. Regardless, the ritual was performed, which then caused the events of the Dragon Break. Now, we have gone through the events of the Dragon Break in our first era overview, so I'll just give a quick overview now. Basically, they were upset to think that Akatosh and Uriel were one in the same, and unable to prove that this was the case through theological argument, they tried to use the power of the hurling disc to make the universe accept this as a truth. We have no real way of knowing if it worked. Even the Emperor and Empress's accounts differed during the events.
And they're both equally bizarre. The Empress thought that the influence of the Alessian Order stretched across the stars, and the Emperor believed that Tamriel was wrapped up in an egg.
The event did have lasting impact on the Alessian Order though, and they lost the trust of a large amount of the population. This would finally pave the way for the demise of the Alessian Empire.
After this dragon break, the Thracian plague spread throughout Tamriel, causing devastation, and much of the population was killed as a result. In response, the Empire gathered its largest navy ever to sail the seas of Tamriel, and sailed to the source of the plague, on the island of Thrace. This is the homeland of the Twisted Sload. The fleet led by the admiral from Anvil managed a successful campaign in Thrace, and on his return, the support of the Clovian region snowballed quickly as news of its success spread throughout the land. This meant once again Clovia was a threat to the Alessian Empire, and they raised an army to put them in check. The army moved through the land, but were repelled by Banchorai, where they had such victory against the Vampire Lord, and were routed.
What was once a beacon of hope for the humans, the Empire was like an old man who's past his time. Its influence had spread too far and its priests were thinly spread, unable to keep any semblance of order. This broke down into infighting, and unable to heal its wounds from the Clovian revolt due to a lack of land and income, the Empire was finally ripe to topple, and so the War of Righteousness began. This war spread across the whole of the Alessian Empire, and the Alessian Order was purged from the land. Its monasteries razed, and its religious texts were mostly destroyed. This all-out evangelical war caused the Alessian Empire to crumble and plunged Cyrodiil back into a patchwork of small kingdoms in a loose government with plenty of squabbling between them. And it would stay this way until the Roman Empire rose up and reunified the land.
And that's everything. So thanks ever so much for watching the Game Noir Archives. Please look at our other Elder Scrolls episodes and playlists on the channel. And also, if you do like the look of things, please go onto our Patreon page and subscribe, so we can offer you a few things there, and it will help us to bring you some more great videos.